Alrighty guys, hello and welcome back to the show. So today what we're going to be doing is going through the recent patch notes. This is going to be kind of interrupting our regularly scheduled programming. This is not going to be in place of any casts or any ladder matches, Supreme Commander Science games, anything like that. This is just going to be a real quick ad hoc. I just set OBS to capture my Chrome window. I haven't really put together a script or a whole lot of preparation on this, but I wanted to walk through these patch notes and share a little bit about how they're hitting me from a balance perspective, what I think this is going to change within the game. And I'm coming at this from probably more of a novice point of view. I'm definitely not a professional, so take my opinion with a grain of salt, but I thought it would be a good exercise for me, and I figured you guys might as well come along for the ride. So jumping into it, what you guys are looking at is the patch notes as they've been deployed. So 3718. You can see past patch notes as well. There are links on the FAF forum if you want to go back and see how everything has changed. Really, the summary on this patch is it aims to increase the power of early attacking options through buffs to T1 bombers and labs. Also aims to align the strength of Tech 1 tanks more closely through adjustments to the Aurora and Mantis. So if you guys are watching my channel, I'm like in love with the Mantis. I love the way that these guys work. So we'll see what the changes look like. On the Aurora side, it looks more like a tweak. So they're increasing unit costs, so mass, power, and then build time increasing very, very slightly. I don't think this is huge, but they are giving it almost a 10% increase in health, or a little over a 10% increase in health, which I think is pretty large whenever you compare. So previously, the Aurora has had like just over 50% of the health of like a Mantis or a Striker, and so bringing it up to 155 and keeping the range the same is, I think, going to be a pretty good buff. So I might have to go back and try Aeon again. Aeon's usually one of the factions that I struggle with a little bit more, but I might have to go back and give it some love. We also increased the speed as well as the rate of fire. So again, I think that one of the biggest weaknesses of the Aurora and the Aeon as a faction is their ability to deploy units relatively quickly. So the Aurora speed is jumping from 2.9 to 3. Compare and contrast that to the Mantis. The Mantis is, I believe, almost 20% faster, and even still, it's about 20% faster. But it's nice to see the Aurora getting some love and balancing out that faction a little bit more instead of them being, quite as paper thin and immobile, and them getting the ability to get a little bit more speed, get a little bit more survivability, as well as increase that fire rate. So they brought the fire rate brought the fire rate up by a little bit as well. So going into the Mantis, so they didn't mess with my baby that much. They did up the mass and did up the build time very, very slightly. I don't think that this is going to impact a whole hell of a lot. This is an under 10. Well, actually, now whenever I think about it like that, it's a little under 10%. So the Mantis might be a little bit less viable on that side, just because of how much more mass it is actually costing. I think that at 56 mass, this makes it the most expensive T1 mainline battle unit. I think that and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think both the FAM and the Striker are like 55 or 54. So the Mantis might be the most expensive, which, I mean, makes sense. I think that the Mantis is probably the best one with its mobility, as well as relatively good damage to health ratio. So that's it for the T1 mainland battle units. And then we get into really the main portion of this show, which is they basically took labs as well as the combat scout on the Seraphim and reworked the bejesus out of them. So the biggest thing here, and one of my viewers has already so astutely noted, I'm gonna have to go back and retest the labs versus mainline battle units, just to see if it's viable to go for Mech Marines over Strikers, at least to some extent, or for some purposes. Because as it stood before this patch, it was really almost never viable. Like, you almost never went for labs unless you were panic spamming because somebody had dropped artillery or something like that in your base. You almost never went for labs after initial harass. But these are some pretty, I think, compelling numbers that are being bumped here. So the Flare, similar to the Aurora, is going through much more of a rework, but it's getting like over a 50% bump in health. This does come at a little bit of a sacrifice in speed, but a 30% increase in damage. So by and large, yes, you are increasing the cost by 20%. You're increasing the power cost by a little over 1/7 of what the power cost was initially. I'm not fast enough to do that percentage conversion in my head. But I mean, like, you're increasing health by 50%, like bringing it up to 115. For reference, at 115, that's only 25 hit points less than what the Aurora was before its little buff. So that's insane that you would have a lab that has that kind of health while still being able to have 3.8 movement speed. The Hunter is also getting some love. So pretty big bump in health, little under 50% of an increase on the health side of things. I think this is pretty good. I think from a damage perspective, the Hunter, and the movement perspective, the Hunter was pretty good. It was just so paper thin. Like if you were Cybran and you were doing a lab raid and you were up against UEF, Mech Marines would be like, I mean, you could almost use Mech Marines in like as a defensive tool because they were so much tankier than the Hunters are. So it's good to see them getting some buffs on that side of the house. Mech Marine is probably the most complicated one because I thought that the Mech Marine was the most viable of the light assault bots as a mainline battle unit. And we saw this in mine and Kappa's video, which I'll try and link that video down in the description below as well, where Kappa and I are both relatively equal on the skill level side of things. We're both about 800 on the ladder, about 11 to 1200 on global rating. So not pros, but we know what we're doing. And so we did a couple of games against each other where one of us would go, we were only allowed to build labs instead of, mainline battle unit, and then we would flip-flop and go vice versa. And both times the tanks ended up winning. But the labs that we used were Mech Marines. So I think that Mech Marines with this new balance, getting an increase in speed, although this does come at a little bit of a health sacrifice there. But this is an interesting one with turn rate and turret yaw speed. So yaw, I actually had to look this up because I wasn't familiar with the term what yaw is. I thought it was y'all. I thought they had misspelled y'all because I'm from Texas and we're Southern and we say y'all. But this is, I think, some interesting rebalance here. And we'll definitely have to do some testing as far as which lab is now, I think, the most viable, because in the previous test, the Mech Marine pretty much stood head and shoulders over the Hunter and the Flare. So I'd be interested to go back now, and I'll probably rerun the tests to see if everything stays the same. And so look for that in probably a Supreme Commander Science video coming up here in the future. Which brings us to the Selene. So the Selene is the Seraphim's kind of halfway point between a light assault bot and then a scout, so it has some radar. It does have a little bit of damage, whereas like the other faction scouts either have like 1 damage per second or just no ability to attack in the case of the Cybran land scouts. So this is an interesting rework. We're seeing an increase in range, a decrease in speed, an increase in build time. So really just some rebalancing. They're not tweaking damage or health really. It's really just a little bit of an increase in range to make it a little bit more viable on sniping engineers from further away, and then increasing the build time is kind of the penalty on that. Down here, this is what I think is more interesting. So previously with the Selene, you had to actually like stop and then shoot. It was hard to do like the kind of standard lab where you're just circling around and moving, and ability to kind of kite engineers and keep them from reclaiming, which is why I think Selenes were a little bit worse to some extent, is they could be reclaimed by engineers. They kind of had to stop if they were shooting because they didn't have the ability to rotate their turret. So seeing turret slave to body is now going to false is, I think, going to be a really big buff, a little bit more than I think some people are realizing. And then, changing the yaw range from 30 to 60 as well as the yaw speed. So yaw speed, so the turn rate is going down a good amount, but even so, I think this is still a pretty big buff to this particular unit. This gets into, now we get into a little bit smaller tweaks, so really just a little bit of a lower on the max speed on the Mongoose side. I don't know if this was necessarily needed, just in my opinion, because the Mongoose was so paper thin from an HP perspective anyway. I don't really know if you needed to sacrifice the max speed on that. This one I'm more happy with just from an irritation perspective, because what I would do is I would grab like all of my units playing Cybran on T2 and just and move them as a group. And inevitably, if you're moving like any degree of distance, your hoplites, which are also your weakest unit, are going to get there first and then just get annihilated. So I'm really glad that I'm actually glad that they're lowering the max speed. I'll probably post a ladder game like tomorrow and realize how terrible of an idea it was to be glad that they're lowering that max speed. But this is going to be nice for me just because that means I don't have to micro these guys quite as much as I have in the past. And then mobile shields getting a little bit of a tweak as far as max speed, almost kind of more of a nerf, both with energy maintenance going up as well as max speed going down on the parashield side. I don't think that this is going to be game breaking. People are still going to build mobile shields and put them into their units. This isn't going to change that. On the air side of things, the air scout, this is getting changed, so power cost being upped. I guess that whenever it says air scout and T1 bomber, this is across the board. So independence of faction. So even though you're seeing a flying eyes here and a thunder here, or a scorcher, sorry, thunder, total annihilation, just like coming back, a scorcher. Here, I think this would apply to all T1 bombers across the board. So we're seeing power cost hike as well as a build time hike on the air scout side. And then on the bomber side, we're actually seeing things get much cheaper. So Kappa, if you're watching this, your T1 bomber is about to become way more viable with mass costs being dropped by a little over 10% and energy costs being dropped by a little over 16%, which is insane. Build time also being cut down by almost 30%. So break off distance as well as radar radius, this is just going to help them be able to snipe engineers a little bit better as far as being able to turn and then being able to identify your targets on the ground. Giving them their own radar is that's going to be interesting. I don't know how this is going to work out. The Jester. So tweak on the T1 gunship. So a long time ago, if you've been around the game for a while, level or T1 like Jester rush instead of a bomber rush, you could kind of get away with it from a balance perspective if you built your energy. If your build order was correct, you could build like, I think the order was like Air Factory, 2 P-gens, 3 mass extractors, 2 engineers, and then your Jester, and you could just about balance it out so that it would come out on time. And a Jester, with its ability to hover, makes it much easier to take out groups of engineers, I think. So seeing mass costs get dropped, energy costs, build time, just an overall buff as far as the cost goes. But it is getting a nerf on the health, max speed, and damage side of things. So we'll see if this comes back into viability. I don't really see it very much anymore. Even whenever it was quote unquote viable, you almost really only saw it on the pro scene because lowly players like me couldn't get the build order down correctly. So lastly, and we're getting into some miscellaneous ones down here, the structures. So Flood, which is the zombie people in Halo. No, wait, wrong game. This is Supreme Commander, not Halo. It's cyber and sonar, as well as radar. So sonar strength, sonar stealth, as far as and radar stealth. I don't really know how much this is gonna affect. I don't really play Navy a whole lot, so I'm probably not very qualified to talk on that one. The Alana Os has its animation reduced to increase the speed of its firing cycle. That's good. We need the Alana Os to be able to fire faster. It also explodes like other strategic missile launchers whenever killed. So it looks like it was buffed a little bit, but it does have some volatility that is attached to it. Miscellaneous overcharge, another pretty big change here. So overcharge changed from a variable system to a fixed damage per energy used. I think that this is a better way of doing it. Instead of pushing O and then seeing like a minimum or maximum and then everything fluctuating in between, it should be tied to what your energy production is. I completely agree with this. I think it just makes a little bit more sense, just because I'm also kind of a realistic kind of guy. But we can read through this. Basically, it's just talking about the different levels. So minimum damage is 1250 at the cost of 5k energy. This was the previous floor that you needed to activate activate overcharge. So you still need to have you still need to build a T1 energy storage in order to gain access to overcharge. Maximum damage is 15k. This is pretty hefty, but you do have it costs 60k energy. Like even if you're plus like 3k on your energy, that's going to take 20 seconds for you to get that full storage back. well, it will drain a maximum of 90% of stored energy. So basically it's just changing it from a variable system to something that's fixed, that you can predict exactly how much damage is going to be. So if somebody drops like a bunch of Aeon support commanders and builds a GC in your base, you'll be able to reliably know exactly how much damage you're going to be able to get out of your overcharge, and then how quickly you need to go and change pants after you crap yourself. Nukes, so experimental nuclear missile health, and then anti-nuke missile. I'm not really sure what this means 100%, so I'm not going to talk about it. I thought I was going to talk about it, but I'm not. And then we have some real small ones. The biggest one down here would just be air factory roll off. I think that the Seraphim and the Aeon have had like pretty pathetic roll off if you're building engineers off of their factories, whereas the UEF and the Cybran were a little bit faster. So it's nice to see that normalized among the factions. The other thing that this balance did was it reworked the target priorities on this. So we're not going to get super deep into this because this is a lot of text, and I mean it's on GitHub, so you know that it's going to be dense whenever you look at anything on GitHub. But really, whenever they reworked these target priorities, they just worked them to make a little bit more sense than they did before, which I really like. So just to come in here, if you guys want to take a look, I'll try and remember to post this in the description down below, but come in here if you want to see what all the targeting priorities are. But just by and large, they just make a little bit more sense. Things like making Percy target ACU over T1 units and defensive structures over T1 units. Like you don't want your Percivals like wasting their firing cycles on like Zooies or something like that. You want other units dealing with those Zooies, like Ilshivas or something like that you're pairing with. Actually, it wouldn't be Ilshivas, it would be like Pillars or Mongoose or something like that, or Titans. You want your Titans dealing with T1 spam. You don't want your Percivals wasting shots. Some other ones that just make sense are Absolver targeting shield over personal shield, target shield over personal shield over the rest. So it's going to target either static shield or mobile shield first, which makes sense, right? You don't want you build Absolvers to be shield mitigation, right? You don't want them wasting shots on like Harbingers, where even though they do have a shield, but there are probably more important shield units that would be could be dealt with those Absolvers. So gonna end the video there. Let me know what you guys think. This is the first time I've ever done this. I know, and this video ended up actually being way longer than I thought it was gonna be. So look out for the redesign tests as far as labs versus mainline battle units, because I will have to go back and redo that test, and that'll probably end up being another video. So keep an eye out for that one. Otherwise, guys, thank you so much for watching. Your support, comments, liking the videos, whatever it is, you name it, however you guys support the channel, it really means the world to me. And I'm really glad there's a lot of you that have been trying ladder for the first time or things like that based on my videos, which is awesome to see. I want to see the community grow. I want to see this game really succeed, because the devs on this game really put so much work into it. And I get so much enjoyment out of this game, way more than I think the $20 that I initially paid for it. So I just want other people to enjoy the fun. But I will stop yakking, and I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, peace.